it's more than one type. In these examples, we will be following the rules for multiplying and dividing. Even though there's some adding and subtracting going on, we're going to follow those rules, so we're going to count significant digits. The other thing that these questions are asking is that you recognize this idea, which I'm sure you have heard in math at some point in your life. There is an order that math operations should occur in. A lot of the time, your calculator is smart enough to do it for you, but there are some situations where you really have to know what comes first. The B stands for brackets. The E stands for exponents. The D and the M are division and multiplication, and they are equal to each other. It could go multiplication then division, or division then multiplication, and you would get the same answer. Same thing with adding and subtracting. Adding comes first in this little mnemonic so that it makes a word that you can say, but they're equal to each other. You could subtract before you add or add before you subtract, and your answer would be the same. But dividing and multiplying has to come before adding and subtracting. So when we look at these four questions, I want to show you something about the order of operations first, and then we'll talk about significant digits. In 3A, what that means is that first, you have to do what is in the brackets. Even though adding is what's in the brackets, because it's in brackets, it has to come first. Then, the second thing that you do is dividing. Now, if you were to type this into most scientific calculators exactly the way it's written, your calculator will probably do it for you. But you need to be aware of this, because sometimes either your calculator is different or the way that it's written, your calculator might not recognize. Now in B, you could do the question in the order that it's written, or you could do it backwards and you would get the same answer. Because multiplying and dividing are equivalent, it doesn't matter in which order you do them if they're the only things that are in the question. Now in C, we have brackets again. So what's inside the brackets has to come first. And then this has to come second, so that you know if we put a number in front of a set of brackets with no math operation sign, it means multiply. So this means multiplying even though we didn't put the little times. Now the last one is actually the one that interests me the most, because it looks a lot like formulas that we will use in this section. A lot of the formulas we'll use have two things that you subtract on top of a fraction and two things that you subtract on the bottom. It's really important for you to recognize that this really means that there should be brackets there. So when you have a fraction and there's an operation on top and an operation below, you need to do the operation on each part of the fraction first, then you do the dividing that the fraction actually suggests. So I'm going to say that this is 1A, this is 1B. First, you have to do those two subtractions. Then second, you will do the dividing. If you want to type it into your calculator all at once, if you put brackets around those two subtractions, they will happen first. And so I know when I type this into my calculator, that's what I end up doing. Now up until there, would anybody like to ask any questions about the order of operations at all? So the other thing that you'll notice as I ask you to do these questions on this page is that we will need to use scientific notation to represent our answers here. So scientific notation, you've seen before. It's where you have something times 10 with some sort of power. Now your calculator sometimes will tell you the power. If you recall, there's that little E button that I showed you how to use in the chemistry unit. Other times you might have to do it yourself. And so what I'd like to ask everybody to do is, if you haven't already, take a minute, decide what the answers to these calculations are. If you're confident, round them off to the correct number of significant digits. If you're not, I will show you that part. So the first thing that you need to do is come up with an answer, and then I'll go through and show you how to round them off. So for the first question, I showed you already that you have to do the adding first and the dividing second. The other thing I'd like to mention, because a few people asked me this, is you don't round off your answer until you're done all of your calculations. And this will become more and more important as we go through this unit. Don't round off an answer if it's not your final answer. If you're still going to do some more calculating with a number, leave it with all of the decimal places it has until you're done your calculation. Most calculators store the last answer that you found. And if you're not sure how to pull up the answer that your calculator just found, let me know. On the TI calculators, let's say that I do something easy like 1 plus 1 equals, gives me 2. If I don't do anything else and I just press another math operation like plus 3, it'll automatically bring up the answer that I just had. If you don't remember to do that, most calculators have a button that's a second function. On the TI calculators, it's second and then the little negative button at the bottom. It says ANS for answer over the top, and that brings up the last answer that you just calculated so that you can use it with all of its decimal places. Now back to this. That means that I will do this first. I won't round my answer off yet, and then I'll do 0.0021 divided by that. Now, depending on your calculator, there's two different versions of the answer you get. On the TI calculator, you probably got 6.829 blah, 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 E negative 4. On some of the other calculators that aren't quite as much like a computer, you probably got 0.0006829, etc. Those two numbers are the same. They represent the same thing, but one of them is in scientific notation and one of them is not. So that you know when your calculator gives you this E, that means times 10 to the power of. So here, where my calculator told me E negative 4, that really means, that really means times 10 to the power of negative 4. Now, just so you know, if you ever had to switch a number into scientific notation, here's a good example because I have both of them written down. The bottom number is not in scientific notation. Scientific notation tells me have one number in front of the decimal. So I take my decimal and I move it 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. Now, since I moved it 4 spots to the right, my exponent is negative. So moving to the right equals a negative exponent. Since I moved it 4 times, I put 4 as the exponent. That's how you make scientific notation. You move the decimal so there's only one number in front of it. If you move it to the right, you put a negative. If you move it to the left, you don't. And you count how many spots you moved it. Since I moved it 4 times here, my exponent is 4. Now, the other thing I have to do in this question is round off my answer to have the correct number of significant digits. Since this value had 3 significant digits, this one had 4, and this one had 3, I'm going to choose the smallest number of significant digits. That means my answer should only have 3 significant digits. So I will round my answer off. I need to get rid of that 9. Since 9 is 5 or higher, that means I round the next number up. So my answer would be 6.83 times 10 to the power of negative 4, or 0.000683. Would anybody like to ask any questions about the first one? be either of those, yep. The second one usually wouldn't imply scientific notation because it gives you a bigger number. When I do this calculation, whichever order I do this in, I end up getting 122.432, and it goes on. I only want 3 significant digits in my answer because there were 3 significant digits in all of my original values. So I can simply round my number off to 122. If you chose to do scientific notation, which is acceptable here, you would have written 1.22 times 10 to the power of 2. Just to show you how that would have worked, the decimal is technically right here after the second 2. I would have moved it 2 spaces to the left. Since I moved it to the left, I don't put a negative on my exponent. I moved it 2 places, so my exponent is 2. Now C is usually one where people struggle because you have to use scientific notation for C. The answer that you get is 62,499.648. And you might recognize that you can only have 2 significant digits because of that number 6.4. And so you ask yourself, well, how can I even round that off? I need only 2 numbers. If I wrote 63,000 or 62,000, that still has 5 significant digits. So my only solution is to do scientific notation. I'm going to take the decimal and move it 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. Now I have 6.2499, etc., times 10 to the power of 4. Then I can round my number off. I only want 2 digits, so I'm going to get rid of the 4 and the 9 and the 9 and everything that comes after it. Since 4 is lower than 5, I don't have to round the 2 up. So my answer would just be 6.2 times 10 to the power of 4. Now the last one, you don't need to use scientific notation because it's not super small, but you could. In the last one, the answer that you actually should get is 0.0619232. You are only allowed to have 1 significant digit. The reason would be, for example, here or here. There is only 1 significant digit in both of those values. 0.05 has 1 significant digit because those 2 zeros at the beginning don't count. Same thing with 0.2. So I could simply say 0.06, or I could say 6 times 10 to the power of -2. Either one of them would be acceptable as an answer.